and to the possible use of these images. Can I just check whether we have any apologies for absence?
All Cabinet members are in attendance, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Declaration of interests. Ask any, have any Cabinet members got any disclosable pecuniary interest or personal interest in any item on the agenda? If so, you can either declare it now or at the time the item is first indicated. And I'd also like to read out another statement concerning the council tax precept, as the council meeting that will take place next week includes the decision on the county precept. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind members of a general dispensation granted by the Conduct Advisory Panel relating to the revenue budget and the precept item. This dispensation enables members with a beneficial interest in land within the administrative area of the County Council to partake and vote in the County Council business relating to the setting of the council tax or precepts. It is therefore taken as read that all Cabinet members have declared an interest in item 7. You all happy with that? Can we have the confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting? Has anyone got any changes, additions, or anything else to say about those minutes, or are you happy with them? All agreed. Thank you very much. I have a few opening remarks before we get on to the main agenda. First of all, on COVID recovery, we are now in the recovery phase as far as I'm concerned. That's not to say that there won't be other variants of the COVID-19 strain in the future, and I'll certainly leave it to the Director of Public Health to give us more information on that. But as far as I'm concerned, we're now in the recovery phase where I think, from our personal point of view, there will be the opportunities for more people to work in the office, and I would suggest that there will certainly be more people working in our offices here midweek, at least, depending upon the particular appointments they hold. The second item I'd like to mention in my opening remarks is the government white paper on levelling up, to use its short title. Clearly, there have been a number of other counties that are in the first wave of county deals. We weren't one, but we didn't expect to be one. There wasn't a single county in the southeast that is amongst the first wave. But the work we've done since August has put us in a good position to follow up on the first wave. We've done a lot of work with our districts, with our unitaries, and with authorities near to us. So as I say, we're in a good position, and from that point of view, the 3 levels give us the opportunity, at least at level 2 for a county deal, to have a governance system not dissimilar to the one we have at the moment, if we had a county deal just for the county. Clearly, if that included unitaries, the actual governance model would be slightly different for obvious reasons. But as far as I'm concerned, we're on track. We've done a lot of work that's been very worthwhile. And in addition, we have looked closely, and we're working closely with our districts and the unitaries in Surrey about the possibility of an economic regeneration board, economic prosperity board, which is outside the county deal. It's a twin-track approach, which at least allows us to demonstrate that regardless of whether we get a deal straight away, it does mean that we're going to work closer together for the benefit of the people that live in Hampshire. That completes my opening remarks. And now let's move on. We have, I think, no deputations. Is that right? So if we move on to item 6, learning to live with COVID and working towards economic recovery. And I think Councillor House would like to speak on this one. I managed to get you first, Councillor House, rather than start off with someone else.
Well, I know it's very reassuring,
I'm
Chairman.
improving.
You're getting the rhythm of this, aren't you? Which is excellent. You've partly preempted one of my questions by your earlier announcement, but I want to push you a little bit further on that in a moment if I can. But I firstly just wanted to thank the staff team for the detailed economic analysis in the paper that we're still getting. I think probably in many places that would have eased off as the economy got back to something close to normal. But it's really good to see that data there. It's very helpful. I think it might be helpful if it was pushed out to all members. I think those of us who read Cabinet papers as a matter of diligence and routine get to see this stuff, but I suspect that the vast majority of members don't. So it might be quite handy for some of this stuff to get round. My comment really is on the county deal issues. And clearly the Cabinet paper was written before the government announcement last week, which is perfectly understandable. And you've given some indication, Chairman, as to where you think the County Council should be going next. But it's pretty clear, if you take the spin away from it, that we are not on the government's fast track for levelling up. Because we're not in this first wave of county deals. In fact, nowhere in the South East is. We're very much on the fast track for levelling down because it suits the government's agenda not to give the South East any priority in these issues because of the Red War. So I did wonder, given where we're at, and given that none of the governance levels, level 1, 2 or 3, quite fit where any of us really expected this to go. Level 1 is pretty useless and gives no power, no control, no influence to anyone. Level 2 might, as you say, just about work on the county council boundary, but it doesn't work on the historic geographical boundary of the county, including Southampton, Portsmouth, by the time we add on the Isle of Wight. So where does this really leave the county council in terms of its aspiration? I know we've got a leaders' meeting with district councils coming up soon, but I think it would be quite helpful, either today or perhaps next week at full council, for a bit more to come out in terms of where the administration thinks this could be going, given that context that the government sees levelling down rather than levelling up as the priority in Hampshire, and where therefore the county sits with this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor House. I won't answer your question completely, but what I will say is we are proposing to change some of the recommendations to accommodate at least some of the material in the white paper. And I think what I would say, though, is the fact that we were off the mark pretty quickly in August, and we've been working, as you know, both with districts and unitaries since. We are in a stronger position than many other counties in the South East to get some form of the deal, either as a county deal or in terms of a growth and prosperity board, which at least gets some of the benefits that we would have if we had a full deal. But I agree with you, it's early days yet. I think the other thing I'd say is there are one or two other counties that have similar issues to ours of having both unitaries and a county council. And the one I have picked is Devonshire, which has obviously Plymouth and Torbay, and they are in the first phase. So we'll be looking closely at the sort of governing models that they manage to get past the winning post, because that will give us a clear indication of what we may have to do in order to achieve a county deal.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll wait with bated breath for your statement next week on how we avoid levelling down. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, let's move on to living with COVID, and Steve Crocker.
Yes, thank you.
If you'd like to start this off.
And what I'll do is initially I'll invite Simon Bryant, our Director of Public Health, just to give the update on COVID, and then I'll make a few additional points, if I may, Chair.
Many thanks, Leader. So what we've seen recently is a slight decreasing trend of COVID across all of our districts. As we know, there's variation across the patch, with some districts being higher for the various factors we've discussed previously. And that'll be about previous infection rate, that'll be about the demographics, and that'll be about the way people are working and proximity to particularly London. So we are kind of really mindful of that. We knew as we opened up society that we'd see a kind of a rise. We've seen that, but it feels like that's evening off now. So we're still on that downward trend, which will take some time to come down. The age groups that are impacted greatly are the 5 to 9s and the 10 to 14s. That's again because particularly the 5 to 9s are not able to be vaccinated, and they're at school quite rightly, and that's the right thing to do, but that does mean they're mixing, so how we manage that going forward. And again, we know that at the minute, most people aren't seriously ill with COVID. Of course, there are some people who do get ill, but the greater the people infected, there'll be that very small proportion, and that's just a numbers game, so we do see increases there. So with regard to hospitals, with regard to COVID, actually the rates are fairly stable and coming down. ITU is not seeing that pressure we saw previously. People aren't requiring that. Finally, just worth updating on vaccination uptake. So we've really seen a great increase across the number of months. That has slowed down now, as you would expect, as more people have been vaccinated. And that programme is really focusing on those groups and areas where there's lower uptake, and we're working on those to ensure that everyone who may want to take up the vaccine that hasn't taken it up yet has that opportunity. We're still seeing people taking up their first dose, which I think is really encouraging at this point because it's been around for a long time. Actually, let's not give up. Let's not assume people aren't getting vaccinated. So that's really good news. And Leader, I'll give a much more detailed update in the local outbreak briefing later on.
Thank you, Simon. Steve, anything to add?
Just to pick up on a few points, Leader. Firstly, whilst there's lots of encouraging news, for our workforce, lots of activity still continues. So just to draw your attention to paragraph 79, which outlines some additional and ongoing pressures within our adult services around discharge. And also in paragraphs 88 and 89, you'll see some hopefully useful information about attendance at school, which is a real priority for government. And I'm pleased to say that in Hampshire we've got a higher than national average number of children attending school, but we also have significant pressures on our children's social care services because of the numbers of children being referred, and that continues. That's continued since March last year throughout the pandemic. Just a few other points. The paper also contains quite a lot on economic recovery, and within that is a section on the county deal. As the leader says, we've now obviously received the white paper, and that's very welcome. And the clarity within that white paper, particularly as a table which sets out levels and responsibilities, which I think is really, really useful. And I would suggest that shows that we've been going in the right directions. And as the recommendations in due course will show, we want to further develop our relationship with neighbouring authorities and partners, and indeed Surrey County Council as a potential partner. So at which point, back to you, Leader.
Thank you, Steve and Simon. Councillor Heron.
Chairman, thank you. And I just wanted to comment, perhaps if I may, following Councillor House's interjection. I think the white paper, all 330 pages, will require more time for us to study in detail. But while I understand Councillor House has found his new catchphrase, I think it is useful to look at some of the wording in there, because actually I felt that the document was very clear that this was an opportunity to level up across the United Kingdom. It did recognise that perhaps there are needs and requirements to the north of the country. I think that's something that successive governments have attempted to tackle. That's not new. In fact, I can remember both a Labour and indeed a coalition government that seemed to spend an awful lot more money up north, and I think we all recognise that whether it's funding per head of pupil or a range of other measures, we as Hampshire are certainly not getting what I would say a needs-based requirement. And again, something that is in that white paper is a requirement again to look at how funding is done to make sure that it reflects current needs. But actually, Chairman, I think that the Levelling Up white paper has some good news for the South and the South East. One of the comments that strikes me in there is what Levelling Up can do to try and release some of the housing pressure on the South East. How you might ensure that some of those requirements, some of the pressures that then come onto our adult social services from that housing pressure might be relieved. So, Chairman, I do think it is a levelling up white paper. I think it will have its challenges. I think it will have its opportunities for Hampshire. But, Councillor House, if you're going to pick a catchphrase, why not pick one that's new and accurate?
Thank you, Councillor Heron. Any other comments at all? Well, I think I'd just add one that I hadn't thought of at the time, and that is that I think I'm right in saying the white paper does actually acknowledge that although we're more prosperous in the southeast than parts of the north and the Midlands, we do have pockets of deprivation. And since we're on the subject of catchphrases, the one I always use is levelling up should depend upon need and not geography. And it's a point that I think we can probably make a few times in the future. Looks as Councillor Reid, do you want to say something? Yes.
Yes, sorry, I didn't get in quickly enough. I agree with everything you've just said, Leader. I think the major point that's come out for me from the white paper is something that we in Hampshire have said all the time, that devolution of responsibilities, and hopefully with money attached, is not the same as local government reorganisation. And we have positioned ourselves against the local government reorganisation sirens that there have been within this county, and in favour of making the existing system work better and getting more advantage from government, which the whole of Hampshire needs, so that we can make life better for the people who live here. Now, the white paper, I think, has confirmed that we took the correct position on this, and we are well positioned, therefore, to go ahead in the direction that the white paper is setting out.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Any other comments at all? Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. I get disappointed when people go for sound bites and talk about levelling down. And I concur with my colleagues there. I think it's really important to understand where we are on the current paper, as will come out in future conversations as well, which is we're in a fantastic position. Those organisations or those councils that are in the first wave will undoubtedly be in a difficult, challenging role, and we can gain from actually looking at best practice and what happens, as the chairman said, regarding Devon and their unitaries. I think that puts us in a strong position, but the reason we're in that position is because of the work done by this council over the past 6 to 9 months since this whole issue arose. And if we'd done as certain areas were suggesting, sat back and waited just for the white paper, we wouldn't be in the current advantageous position that we're at this moment, which is probably ahead of some of those councils in the first wave. So I think it's commendable, the work that this council has done, led by the chairman and the vice chair, and I would like that to be on record.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forster. Anybody else? Okay, well look, we've got some recommendations in front of us. In para 2 on page 23, I would like you to approve the one at para 2. Para 3 I would like adjusted, and I'll read out what I'm suggesting. Before endorses, we add the words, notes the opportunities that were set out in the Levelling Up the United Kingdom White Paper. And later in the text, after the words County Deal, to add the words and aligned devolution opportunities potentially beyond the pan-Hampshire geography involving bordering areas, and mention the white paper as well as set out in the white paper. And finally, at the end of that particular recommendation, add the words and aligned devolution opportunities potentially beyond the pan-Hampshire geography involving bordering areas as set out in this report and in line with the white paper. I know that's rather a complicated addition, but what it seeks to do is to ensure that that recommendation takes account of what was in the white paper. And in addition to that, a new recommendation which will effectively appear in para 3. So the remaining recommendations, which at the moment are at para 3, 4 and 5, on that page become 4, 5 and 6. I think I've got that right. And the new recommendation, which comes up after the one that I've just read out, is this. Following the publication of the government's white paper for levelling up, the Cabinet endorses the continued work and direction of travel for a Hampshire County deal to include the unitary authorities should they wish. In addition, that the County Council will continue the work that has been carried out towards the creation of an Economic Prosperity Board, which will ideally include Surrey and the unitary authorities. Now, I'm sorry that was a bit complicated. Are you all clear about what we are agreeing, and also the remaining recommendations as they appear on the on the agenda? Can I have endorsement for that? Thank you very much. Let's move on to the revenue budget. And I think we've got Councillor House once again peering first.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This one I do need to refer to the report rather than just speaking just from recollection. I think over the course of the last few years, this probably will be a point we can all agree, we have found the budget process increasingly difficult. We know that long term, as we've been told by Rob Carr and by Karen Williamson in the past, that our long-term financial position is not good because the ongoing pressures, demographic pressures of mainly adult care, but also this year we found children's care as well, are such that our income is always going to be on catch-up to our need to spend more. But I have to say, I found this report absolutely bleak. I'm sure colleagues did too. The level of extra spends that we've had to put into social care, both adults and children's, over the course of the last year is absolutely phenomenal. I think I said during one of the earlier budget processes that the COVID drop in spending that we saw for a period would come back to haunt us because that demand would resurface, and that's clearly what we've seen. We've seen it far more, I think, than anyone expected. And logically, you would think that with the pressures on the health service, which we know has now got the biggest backlog in demand ever, that will in turn put more pressure just by default on adult social care because people will come to us for help when they would otherwise have got help from the National Health Service. And that I think is the inevitability of where we're at. And so paragraphs, I think it was 16 to 18. My first notes when I read them were simply quite shocking in terms of the implications for the County Council. And this is something we all share, and it's not a political point in that sense at all. We all live this same experience of the county budget and funding having to be cut from services. But it was the concluding comments that really made me think, well, okay, so where are we going? There was the line that said, we will need to rethink our normal 2-year savings cycle in addressing the deficits. But then there was a full stop at the end of that. There wasn't any suggestion or hint about how we go forward to think about this process. The basic arithmetic in the report in paragraph 137 is very clear. In addition to the £40 million a year savings that we're making at the moment, we need to make an extra £50 million each year of savings going forward. Those are phenomenal numbers that are way, way and above of anything we've had to face as an organisation before. And I'm sure that other county councils are in much the same position. Many will be in worse position than we will be for a variety of reasons, but many will be in a worse position. And that feels to me as though the system has now got to the point of imminent collapse. It may well be that it needs 1 or 2 more councils to follow Nottinghamshire and fall over. It may well be the government tries to disguise some of this by unitarisation of smaller counties, as they did with Somerset, which was about to fall over before they unitarised it. But we shall see. But what's clear is there isn't a solution here at the moment. It seems to mostly affect upper tier authorities in a 2-tier system because they haven't got that hinterland of district services. We don't tend to see many of the unitary authorities in quite the same position. Again, I'm not making a political point here at all, it's simply a fact of life, that it seems to be counties that are struggling most with these budget pressures going onwards into the future. So I guess my question, I don't expect an answer this morning, I really don't, I wouldn't even expect an attempted answer, to be frank Chairman, is I would hope that we could at least have something to say, or you will have something to say to Council next week, To answer that question that's posed in the report, we will need to rethink our normal 2-year savings cycle in addressing the deficits. And the question that's asked is then when and how, because there is no easy solution. And with respect to Councillor Heron and others, no soundbites, simple reality. We are in a hole and we have no way of digging ourselves out of it. And we are not alone in that process. So it's not a political point at all. We know that our lobbying, which we hear about every year, has failed. It's failed through governments of every political colour. Again, it's not a political point. It failed with the Labour government of Blair and Brown. It failed with the coalition government, where, with respect, we probably shouldn't have accepted the council tax freeze. And it's failed abysmally over the course of the last few years, when we know we're not getting the funding that we need to maintain our services. So when and how, Chairman, I'd hope we'll at least get some inkling of an answer next week at Council to reassure our community in Hampshire, quite apart from the councillors in the Council chamber. So no question as such today, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor House. I think I'm right in saying that, wasn't it Nottingham, not Nottinghamshire, that fell over?
No, Nottinghamshire, Chairman.
It was Nottinghamshire. Well, I stand corrected then. Well, you've suggested I don't answer the points you raise at this stage, but I just would like to say that there are serious issues, as we know, with local government finance. And I'm on record as saying that the government need to think carefully. On the one hand, ensuring that they properly fund, and this is true across the country, those services that effectively we are the agents for central government, and not simply see flat funding year by year when the demand goes up, and separate those from the services that we have discretion over, which was the original reason that local government was set up to provide. And I think that's the overarching problem. We are a delivery mechanism for a lot of local central government services, and then we're also a delivery mechanism for those services that we traditionally have provided ourselves from the council tax precept and, of course, in the past, business rates. So I think I would agree with you, there does need to be a reset of the way in which local government is funded, and that is the point I've made on a number of occasions to our MPs. You may think I've been unsuccessful, that's your judgment, but I believe that we have had an impact, and although it's not much a comfort, I think settlements would have been rather worse in the past had we not made the representations we have. Moving on, thank you for your comments. I'll ask Rob Carr, Director of Corporate Operations, to take us through this particular agenda item.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. So 22-23 represents the interim year of your 2-year budget setting cycle. As you know, we've put the savings programme 2023 in place to create 2 years' worth of savings to come in from April 2023. The basis behind that £80 million programme was obviously put together some 18 months ago now, and quite a lot has moved on since that time. So we've talked in the past about having a predicted gap of around 40 million every year, and if I can just refer you to paragraph 104 on page 110, you'll see there the changes that have taken place since we set those targets some 18 months ago. So you'll know in the settlement, the adult social care precept was reduced by 1%, so that's reduced our income by 7 million. But by far the biggest single issue that we're facing at the moment is the growth in adult social care costs. So partly that is driven by increasing demographics, which, as Councillor House has pointed out, have come back after the pandemic. But the biggest element of that is that we're seeing prices increase by 16 to 18% in the market in terms of residential and nursing care that we're purchasing. So that 35 million is effectively a full-year impact of the significant increases that we're seeing over the last 6 months. On top of that, we have other pressures in children's social care in terms of agency costs. We've got to pay for the additional NI, which we know comes in from April 2022. And then we've got other inflationary pressures as well, most notably in energy costs, which we expect to add significantly to our costs next year. So that gives us a new gross budget gap of some £97 million. And against that, within the settlement, we did receive £22.9 million from the government in additional grant. Some of that adult services growth we do link back to COVID, so we have got some one-off COVID funding to set against that. But unfortunately, our original assumption that there would be a peak and that would drop back off is looking unlikely at the moment. So we do think that those adult social care pressures will go on into future years. So we'd always planned to use £40 million of the budget bridging reserve to balance the budget in next year. And after taking that into account, that leaves us with a further net budget gap of £21.5 million. So we're intending to close that by releasing contingencies that have been unused in the current financial year, and then reducing the general allowance that we give for risk in next financial year. So that gives us a balanced budget for next year. Looking ahead, as Councillor House has pointed out, the picture does look quite bleak. So if I can turn you to page 116, at the table under paragraph 137. So that gives our high-level forecast of what we expect things to look like over the next 3 years. Obviously, the comprehensive spending review did give us figures over the next 3 years, but they remain flat. So our expectation is that the funding that we receive over that period will also remain flat. So at the top there, it gives you an analysis of the additional funding that we expect to receive over that period. Some of the extra grant that we've got, we had already taken into account in setting the SP23 savings. So effectively, we lose 14 million of that because it's already taken into account. So you see there, by the time we get to 25-26, our total funding available to us is 122.9 million. But that isn't even enough to pay for the basic pay and price inflation that we add to the budget every year. If you then look at the increases in adults and children's social care costs, both pre and post-pandemic, I mean, those 4 lines alone also equal 192.6 million, which again, when you compare that to the resources that we have available, it just does mean that there just simply isn't enough money coming from government to stem that tide of additional growth. So by the time it gets to 25-26, that gives us a gross pressure of nearly 360 million, which if you then take off the resources that we've got available, gives us a net gap of 237 million, and we've got 80 million as part of SP23 to count against that. So by the time we get to 25-26, we are expecting a £157 million deficit, which, as the report points out, is pretty much twice the size that we would normally expect to be facing at that time. So the good news, if there is any, is that so we've been able to bridge the budget gap in 22-23, and we've also got enough in reserves to meet the gap in 23-24, that additional gap of 48.4 million. So that buys us the time to have a look at what we're going to do to address the position from 24-25 onwards. I think the difficulty, as the report points out, is why we're unable to take the usual process, is that we don't have the firepower to fund that additional £101 million gap that we've got in 24-25. But certainly, as the consultation that we did over the summer last year pointed out, the answer to this does lay with government. We do need to press the government hard, in particular to fund those additional growth costs in social care for both children and adults, which is something that we've been repeating for some time, but is particularly true when we look at the numbers that we're seeing there. So we do have a couple of civil servants, senior civil servants, coming down from DLUC this Friday. We will be talking this through with them because it's important that certainly the civil servants also understand the situation that we're in and can take that back to government. But certainly we will be increasing our lobbying to make sure that people do understand the position that we're in. Happy to leave it there, Chairman, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Any comments from my cabinet? Steve.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rob, for that detailed overview, which I think was really helpful. It's absolutely certain that we need more flexibility and we need that support from government so we can determine what we do and how best to do it. I think the comments earlier on about our lobbying having been unsuccessful are slightly disingenuous insofar as on things like COVID support, where we lobbied for support, we did receive extensive and very good support that we've been able to pass on to the districts, and that has tided us through an incredibly difficult period. And we're continuing that lobbying, and with meetings, as Mr. Carr suggested, we're continuing to work on that so that we are in a better position. But it would be inappropriate to hide the numbers as they are. And I think what we have is a pragmatic budget to go forward on, highlighting the areas where we need to put more focus and we need government support. It is worth putting out that we're disadvantaged by the fact that we are still one of the 3 lowest council tax areas in the country. That means when there are percentage increases that are capped at, as they are now, 1.99 plus 1% for adult social care, the pound value that we get is lower than many other councils with very expensive council tax. And that's something that I think we need to increase our lobbying of ministers and government generally.
Thank you, Steve. Steve Reid.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I fully endorse that point that a 2% increase in the council tax in Hampshire is less in monetary terms than a 2% increase for a council further north. And there should be something that can be done to even that up. I've noted a few points in Rob's report. Paragraph 23, he finishes up that we're going to make a significantly greater draw from reserves to balance a budget in 22/23. And I think that means that when we come to the council meeting, I would be extremely surprised if I heard any arguments that made the case cogently for spending more from reserves, because we're going to need every penny that we have put in them. I would, I'm sure, resist any proposal to do that. Rob has put in paragraphs 80, 81 and 82 a commentary on the inflationary pressures that we are facing, and starts off by talking about energy prices. I won't ask Rob whether he thinks his estimates are right or not, because I don't think anyone round the table could actually predict exactly what is going to happen. But I do think that there is a risk attached in this, that the inflationary pressures come out even higher than Rob has estimated. So there is another danger. And the table Rob has referred to, the point that I read with great interest was actually Appendix 6, where the Chief Financial Officer, or the Financial Officer, Rob, is asked to say, are we robust? And the conclusion is, yes, we are, but the future pressures are huge. And we've made no secret of it. And what Keith said at the top there in his introductory commentary was really playing back what we have been saying to Council for the last few years and what Rob is saying in the report. There is absolutely no question, but we are facing supreme difficulties, and we do need to be treated differently by government to maintain the level of services that we are providing at the moment. But this year's budget is balanced, it works, we're in control of the situation, and we're levelling with everybody to say it's getting even more difficult than it was. So I think this is a budget that stands together. I'll support the budget as it stands and note the difficulties that we're facing for the future.
Thank you, Steve. Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. I think as a Cabinet we're very clear-sighted on the scale of the problem that we potentially face with the pressures on social care funding. I just want to say that the inflation in highways is equally concerning, and we're also seeing inflation of around 16 to 18% in highways. And our highways are not just vital to our communities and to our economy, they're also vital to our doctors and nurses and our carers as they go about looking after people in our community. In this post-pandemic phase, we are going to have to lobby hard to get ministers' attention and the necessary focus. And we should not, I think, shy away from that, given the challenges the country's facing at the moment. We are, one of these serious challenges. But we have to be realistic about what ministers are facing. An NHS backlog, the need to catch up our kids in schools, and the military commitments that the country is making at this very moment. I do want to defend the government to a certain extent, though. They have put in place a local government finance review that we're engaging with, and it's good to hear that Rob is meeting senior civil servants. They've put out a levelling up white paper that we're already well engaged in, thanks to your leadership, Chairman. And we've got a social care plan in this country with the national insurance rise coming in this April, which is a measure that Liberal Democrat MPs voted against last September. So it's all very well for Liberal Democrats in Hampshire to complain about a lack of funding for social care. I'd encourage them to lobby their own MPs to support the plan that this government's put in place to fund social care properly. Thank you.
Anyone else at all? Okay, are you happy then with the recommendations on page 89 for the Cabinet and the recommendations for the Council on page 90 and, if I get right, 91? And in fact 92, which goes on, doesn't it? And a bit of 93. The recommendations on the agenda, I think, would be a better way of putting it. All happy with those? Rob, would you like to take us through that?
Thank you, Chairman. This report is a little bit more straightforward. So this is the update that we bring you each year, adding an additional year to the capital programme. The only thing I think I would like to call out, which has been mentioned already, is you will see in the recommendations a number of requests for additional funding for schemes, which is obviously related to the high construction industry inflation that we've got at the moment. Now, in a lot of areas, we are able to contain that within contingencies that we've already set within schemes, but in some areas that's not been possible. So we're asking for a number of additional resources, some of which have come from areas such as Section 106 or from other organisations, but still we do have quite a range of scheme increases to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Before I ask the Cabinet to comment, I would just like to say that we are carrying out an exercise to disaggregate the capital programme, which over, I think, 5 years is over £1 billion. I think that's right, isn't it? Between those that we can demonstrate to government are a growth type capital programmes to grow Hampshire, to improve our infrastructure in every way, to ensure that we encourage business to come to the county, because that provides us with the evidence the government need, if they're to provide anything, that we're actually putting our hands in our pockets as well. And I think that's a very useful exercise, bearing in mind that at the moment at least, the Prosperity Fund is being allocated to districts, and I'd like it to be on record that we will be doing everything we can to assist those districts that put forward proposals for capital funding from government with some of our own funding as well, where that is possible. Beyond that, I'll ask for comments from the Cabinet. Steve Forster.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to draw attention to, in the capital programme, which, as the Chairman said, is around £1 billion over the next 5 years, 832.6 over the next 4 years specifically. One of the things that is highlighted in the report is the jobs that will be made locally and the purchases locally and the local resourcing. We will endeavour to spend as much as that within Hampshire and with Hampshire-based businesses as possible. The pressures that we're under are quite significant. We're seeing in some cases inflation rates of anything from 4.7 to 17%. And all those projects that are currently in train can be delivered and have got the contingencies built in. For some of the future projects, as Mr. Carr discussed, there are some additional budgets being secured to make sure that those priority projects will continue. Some of the elements are uncertain. For instance, in paragraph 37, there's reference to funding from central government for potholes of 14.9 million. But I think it's hopefully a safe assumption, and perhaps we'll see additional funding from government that will secure that, because I know, as with probably many of my colleagues around this table, it's one of the things that we get more comments from residents on than all the other good work we do around adult social care, safeguarding children, and many others, of which we spend huge amounts for very valid reasons. But potholes is the continued theme that we end up with on our desks, and therefore it's important we get funding to help that. Hence we increased budget this year for that very thing locally. We do have some good projects going forward, like the Great Hall. We do have some carry forward, and we have a nice spread of projects between the north and the south. I was particularly encouraged to see in the north of the county the work being done on the Lynchford Road upgrade and Hertford Bridge roundabout schemes. And it's really encouraging to see that the county continues to allocate its funds for capital across the county fairly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forster. I take your point about the funding from central government for potholes. I look at it in a slightly different way. We only get, I think I'm right in saying, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, 34% of the vehicle excise duty that is collected from drivers in Hampshire. So I don't think it's the government giving us money. I think it's government taking money that I would rightfully say is ours, simply because it's been contributed by individuals who tax their cars and own their cars in the county. And as we have more car ownership than any other county in the country, and I think, apart from London, the largest number of vehicles, I entirely agree with you. We must continue to ask for more funding for the maintenance of our roads. Any other comments at all? Councillor Warwick first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to draw attention to paragraphs 57 to 61. They're discussing the waste management programme and the significant investment in that work, and to really to comment positively on the work of Project Integra, that they are supporting the twin stream collection service, which will really make a big difference at long last to our recycling rates. So that's a very positive one. And then further down in paragraph 64, we have a relatively modest investment in coast and sea defence projects, but actually the uplift, the magic of this is that we work in partnership with other authorities such as the regional flood committees and the flood defence fund. So the uplift of that is a significant 25 million investment in our coastal region. So I just wanted to draw attention to those. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Reid.
Mine is actually quite a local issue. I'm delighted to see that we are maintaining our commitment to the improvements on the Brighton Hill roundabout, which directly affects my division, and putting some extra money in to cater for the pressures that we're facing. It's an absolutely crucial improvement to increase the traffic flow along the A30 as it goes out of Basingstoke, with thousands of homes being slated for being built along there. I'd also just like to pay reference to the fact that being able to maintain our capital programme means that we can also maintain the expertise that is brought to bear by the County Council in doing this sort of work. And nowhere better is that demonstrated in the fact that we've been asked to take responsibility for the improvements along the M27, which is normally a government level scheme, but Hampshire is judged good enough to do it. And that's a huge compliment to Hampshire. The other thing I would refer to is the fact that our officers keep a number of schemes, and this is demonstrated in the schools area, on the shelf, so that if the government makes money available, they can be pulled off and submitted, and we get the grant funding. And I think we've received something like £20 million worth of funding for capital improvements to our schools as a result of our officers being ahead of the game. So this is a very positive area for us.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. I think you make a good point. I think what's forgotten is that some of that capital expenditure we have managed to get government to provide, and that's because we have a team of people that are capable of actually putting together the prospectus for funding grants that are being made available across the country. And that's something that is really important. Without that capacity to do that, because we're a large county, it would be unlikely that we'd have access to the sort of funding that we do have access to as a result. Any other comments at all? Are you happy then with the recommendations on page 199 and the following pages? Thank you very much. Moving on, the next item is the, looking at the wrong screen. Serving Hampshire, there we are. And who's talking to us about that? Jack. Sorry to be a bit slow on the uptake, trying to get my computers to work properly.
That's right. Yes, so Serving Hampshire performance report. So the report provides an oversight of the Council's performance for the first half of 21-22 against our Serving Hampshire strategic plan, and Cabinet are asked to note its contents. Overall, the report demonstrates good performance, reflecting improvements in most areas and demonstrating our ongoing resilience. You're aware that COVID impacts are reported separately, so not covered in this particular report. By way of context, you'll recall having previously agreed the performance management framework, and you'll know that departments are asked to rate their performance against a core set of performance metrics against which we report quarterly, and we use the traditional red, amber, green approach to doing so. Directors also produce an assessment of performance, drawing specifically on findings or results from any internal and external assessments or residents' feedback exercises. So Appendix 2 provides the full range of those assessments. Of particular note is the combined report from HMIC, FRS, the CQC and Ofsted following a joint targeted area inspection in November 21. In terms of the overall performance then, the report reflects that the majority of our performance measures were reported as low risk, with the remainder being medium risk, and mitigations are in place for all those considered to be of medium risk. In the main, we're maintaining or improving performance. There are 5 measures listed in paragraph 13 that speak to continued negative direction of travel, and mitigations plans are already in place in support of those particular programmes. Paragraph 15 then sets out in detail a range of performance highlights against the 4 strategic outcomes, and further supplementary information is available in Appendix 1 to bring those to life. There are no measures identified as high risk, but our Director Returns have noted there are 3 broader areas of risk for the Council that are referenced in the report and which we continue to monitor and mitigate against. Those being pressures in the labour market, cost and availability of construction materials, and pressures on external services. That's all I was going to say by way of overview. I'll hand it over to you, Chairman, for comment.
Thank you, Jack. Comments from the Cabinet. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Leader, when I was given responsibility for the performance area, we had a very different way of doing things, which was largely self-assessment. And we moved over the years to external assessments as far as we can, which I think is a wise direction of travel. I think it was Councillor Crawford at a meeting not so long back said, well, you marked yourself as good, but you wouldn't you? And the answer is no, we wouldn't. We're very happy to, but what we want to do is to have a sober assessment of the direction of travel, and coming up with an assessment of good is not the end of the story, because whilst the officers are compiling these reports, they also, as Jack has said, identify the risks to not staying good. And those risks are a means of managing the council and addressing those issues that might cause us to slip into areas which are not so satisfactory. So this performance report is more than coming up with just a word, good, an assessment. It is actually a means of identifying where we need to give officer attention so that we stay good. And that's the importance of this. I think it's an excellent report and I support it.
Thank you, Steve. Ros.
Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Chadd.
Thank you, Leader. I would just like to draw everyone's attention to actually Appendix 3, the JTI pilot inspection that took place in Children's Services in November, and just to highlight some of the headline findings. And it's that vulnerable children in Hampshire benefit from highly effective multi-agency safeguarding children's partnership arrangements, ensuring that the vast majority of them and their families get the right level of help at the right time across the front door services. I would just like to really personally thank everyone involved in that inspection, and just to let everyone know that the department continually looks to improve and invest time in our social workers in training to make sure that we are effective and that we do the job that we need to do.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chadd. I would totally endorse that. I think one of the issues that happens across the country when safeguarding goes wrong is quite often with smaller councils that don't have our size capacity to ensure that we employ very good quality staff and we have procedures in place, that it's harder for some of the smaller authorities to do. And yes, Rob.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Councillor Humpy.
Really following on from Councillor Chadd about that. I mean, we look at this report every year, and I think particularly this year, to consider the pressures that are on everybody right across all departments on the staff. Everybody quickly forgets, having gone through something like COVID and dealing with that, the business as usual carries on, has carried on, and it has carried on with excellent results. So I think it's worth just noting, Mr. Chairman, so a big thank you to Jack and the team and the whole staff about being able to continue to do that with those pressures on, as I say, on top of that business as usual. But just the capacity that we've had to continue to be able to do that, and in terms of the pressures of staff that have been off as well, and other people picking up those roles. And I think that demonstrates the flexibility that we have right across the whole authority. So I think it's a huge thank you, I would say, from yourself, Chairman, and all of us, and all members to the staff about what they've achieved over the last year.
Thank you, Councillor Humby. I'm certain we'd all agree that that's the case, to give our thanks to all the staff that have made this report such a good one, despite the difficulties that everyone has suffered as a result of COVID. Any other comments at all? Steve Foster, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to highlight pages 245 to 247, the outcomes, because one of the things that we often do is focus on the work that we're doing, but from a resident's viewpoint, it's the outcomes that matter. That's what they really judge us on. And if you look at those pages and the detail on there, which cover a huge variation of different topics, they provide evidence of the amazing work that the county delivers on for its residents. And I really think we should do more to promote those and make sure that we draw the attention of all our members to that and to residents.
Thank you, Councillor Forster. Any other comments at all? Are you happy with the recommendation on page 243? Thank you all very much. And we can now switch off the webcast.